The Queen's Gambit is one of the oldest openings in chess, and no surprise, it begins with white moving the queen's pawn. And black plays d5 to occupy some space in the center. We really don't want to let white get the pawn to e4 for free. That would be the snowplow. And in the Queen's Gambit, white says, I want the snowplow so bad, I'm willing to give you a pawn on the second move. And here we have a big branch. Do we take it or do we defend our pawn on d5? Well, let's just say we play the Queen's Gambit Accepted. By the way, there may or may not have been, but definitely was a TV show called The Queen's Gambit. And in the final game, the pawn was captured. Now here's what white is banking on. White is hoping that his bishop will take the pawn back one day, and then hopefully this pawn can also get to e4. And if black does not challenge the center, then the gambit clearly works. White gets all of this space for free, and white is much better. So here, white usually goes ahead and plays pawn to e4. Now there is a bit of a trick. White could play the pawn to e3, hoping that black tries to keep this pawn. For example, if black plays b5, now we attack the base pawn of this little mini pawn chain by playing a4, and black doesn't have a good way to defend b5. For example, if you play a6, we have un petit combinaison, pawn takes, rook takes, rook. Thank you for the early victory. And if we go back, black could play pawn to c6, but now we see why white pushed the pawn one square and not two. White takes anyway and wins the rook via a completely different method, queen f3, and oops, this rook is quite embarrassed. There actually is a way for black to only lose a knight, but clearly the opening does not turn out in his favor. So if we go back to this position, after d takes c4, we can look at the main line, which is pawn to e4. Now black usually loses this pawn. What he has to do is make sure that these two pawns for white are not mobile, so he has to attack them. Now in that TV show that I referenced, one of the ways to do that is to play knight c6 and bishop to e3, knight f6. I'm basically following the final moves, knight c3, and then black played e5, forcing this pawn to come forward. Now white does get a lot of extra space, but white's pawns are stuck, okay? Her pawns were not able to move. She ended up winning the game. Oops, did I spoil the series for you? You probably saw it coming. Now, let's go back to that major branch. After pawn to c4, black does not have to accept the Queen's Gambit. In fact, it's much safer to play something like the Slav Defense, which is where you put your pawn on c6, and after knight c3, you put your knight on f6, and you almost always follow up with e6. It's very solid, it's very safe, and you know what? If you're black, you won't lose the game in 5 moves if you play the Slav Defense. By the way, one last trick to close out the video. If white plays bishop to g5, black could very well play knight to e4. And the trick is that after takes and takes, if white plays e3 to continue development, oops, this time it's black that has the trick. Queen a5, checking the king. The queen comes all the way over and wins the bishop. The bishop obviously cannot retreat because bishops do not go through pawns. There you go. Little primer on the Queen's Gambit. It is as exciting of an opening as it is a TV show.